How's it going, Yankee fans? Welcome back to Fireside Yankees with your boys Alex and Ryan. So today we're discussing the idea of bringing back Frankie Montas and if the Yankees will have to make a decision between going after, a guy like Jordan Montgomery and bringing back Montas and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Like, how would they go about spending their money? What would we prefer they do? So I'll kind of outline a couple of different instances where the Yankees could have to make some difficult decisions. But I'll say this. Brian Hoke of MLB.com reports that the winds are blowing in the direction of Frankie Montas returning to the Yankees. So pitched 1.1 innings, really nothing to write home about. They just wanted to see that he was healthy, and he is seemingly, and he's making progress. So the idea here would be he would fill a back-end rotation spot, really like the Domingo Germán role of the group, who was expected to leave after his whole situation. And then Luis Severino was probably moving on as well. So Montas on a cheap deal, he floated the idea of around a $7.5 million deal on 1 year with a 2025 club option. So that's kind of where we're looking at with Montas at this point. Really cheap, around what he made in 2023, with an option to keep him for an extra season if he plays well. So I kind of feel like that makes sense. Ryan, I know we've discussed this a couple times, and you also are in the same boat that would kind of make sense for the Yankees. Cheap. He's a starting caliber arm. Over the last 3 years, 2 of those seasons, he's pitched a minimum of 140 innings, and he's had good campaigns. So if he gets back into his regular self, $7.5 million for a player of that caliber would be a steal. It would be a great situation to find yourself in. And if he gets injured, $7.5 million isn't anything to write home about for the Yankees. So you can kind of like forget about it and move on. And they have the club option, so they could always just like cancel that, move on, and whatever. But what are you thinking about Frankie Montas at this point in time? Do you think he makes sense for the Yankees? I definitely see the reason why he would be back in pinstripes next season.
Yeah, so, my thoughts on Frankie Montas are quite simple. When he's healthy, he's been really good, right? Like, I know that Yankee fans can say, well, with the Yankees, he wasn't good, and that's true. Don't get me wrong, that's verbatim what happened. He was not very good with the Yankees, but that clearly has to do a lot with injury. They acquired a guy who was hurt, and then they kept pitching him while he was hurt, and then he got hurt to start the year, right? Like, it's like, if you think that that's a representation of a player's talent level, I think that's a very, I think it's a very unfair way to paint this picture. This isn't a Joey Gallo situation. This isn't a Sonny Gray situation where that player had to leave New York because it just wasn't working out here, right? Frankie Montas got hurt, right? Like, it's not like Frankie Montas was like, I can't, the pressure's a lot here, or, I feel scared to be in New York or whatever it may be. And I'm referencing that Gallo line, not to insult Gallo, but just because, hey, this is a mental game, right? If you're not mentally in the right place, it's hard to be on the field in the right place. And look, Frankie Montas is a guy that the Yankees coveted. We know that they were interested in him prior to the 2022 season. There was a reason why he was one of the most highly coveted starters in that market. He has a really good splitter, obviously the sinker, four-seamer, cutter, good slider. Like, the pitch mix is very diverse. You imagine that, seeing him throwing 95 miles an hour again was really encouraging. Obviously, you can't rely on him to give you 30 starts. That, I think, is the obvious thing here. And people will say, well, this is just the Yankees making another one of those injury-prone acquisitions. Like, what are we doing? But I don't think Frankie Montas would be the only addition to the rotation, and I also think that would create some shakeup that I honestly think they could kind of use. Now, I don't know if that means Clark Schmidt's traded. I don't know if that means maybe Nestor Cortez is traded. I don't know if that means maybe Michael King is traded. But look, the Yankees are going to have a problem in terms of trying to get bats in free agency because this free agent class does not possess the high-end star talent offensively that you're looking for. And you might have to trade from a surplus in order to get better. And, the way I would paint this is, if a team's offering you a quality, outfield bat for, let's say, Nestor Cortez, right? And let's say the years of control make sense and the player value isn't too far off. If you have to make a deal like that to get better, and you have Frankie Montas there, it's a little bit easier to make that deal, right? Because both of them you would consider like, hey, these are guys that you're not sure what you're going to get out of them next year. And in terms of betting on who's going to be better, it's kind of an even bet, right? Like, you'd kind of assume that their median outcomes are going to be similar. You would argue that Montas has the better stuff, but you would say, hey, Nestor had the more recent success in terms of a really good 2022 campaign. But again, like Alex, it just gives you more options. And I think that's important here. You want to have as many options as possible. You want to be able to put yourself in a situation where you can trade from a surplus. And we know the Yankees have done a really good job with pitching. That hasn't been the question for the Yankees, right? Like, can they develop pitching? Can they find arms? That's never been the question for this team. So the question remains, can they find bats, right? And sometimes you have to trade from a place of strength and try to cover a weakness. And in this free agent class, I think that's what they're going to have to do, Alex.
Look, I'm open to this concept, right? You spend a little money in free agency. Let's say you go with Jordan Montgomery, who's going to get significantly less most likely compared to Yamamoto, and you bring back Frankie Montas. That's two pitchers right there taken care of, and then you trade out of that pool of talent, like you mentioned, Schmidt, King, whatever, for a player like Juan Soto, who has a cheaper price tag for 2024, and then obviously is going to get paid big money. So maybe like that's a consideration. Like you trade out of the pool of talent that's cheap and rising, and you go and sign guys for just money. And the Yankees have plenty of money. That's not a concern. But again, like you also want to keep price tags down elsewhere if you're going to invest in a player like Juan Soto. So I'll say this, like if you're going to go into this free agency market, Ryan, and say to yourself, okay, we have the money to either go out and get Montgomery and Montas or just Yamamoto, which direction are you leaning in? Because we have Garrett Cole, you got Nestor, you got Carlos Rodon, you got Clark Schmidt, you got Michael King. Like you have some arms, and then you have Drew Thorpe climbing the ranks, you got Clayton Beater climbing the ranks, Will Warren. Like you have a couple guys that are there ready to kind of contribute in the near term. But, you know, do you really want to take the big money risk on Yamamoto, who's never pitched an MLB inning before, but obviously is extremely talented? Or are you going to go in the direction of, you know, Jordan Montgomery, who we know who he is, and he's gotten significantly better this past season, and bring back Montas on a one-year deal? Like, where would you go if you had the money and you had to choose one of those two avenues?
Yeah, so the avenue I'm choosing, I think, depends on what's available offensively, right? You know, if the Yankees have an opportunity to trade for Juan Soto, and again, that's kind of like the big looming question regarding this offseason, like, will Juan Soto get traded? And if so, you imagine that the Yankees fit very well with, again, just the sheer amount of pitching they have. The Padres want pitching, right? Like, the Padres, I know they had a really good pitching staff this year, but you think of two of the biggest members of that pitching staff, I believe these were the two leaders in WAR on that team. It was Blake Snell and Seth Lugo. Both of those guys are hurt. Or not hurt, excuse me. Both those guys are leaving in free agency, or could leave in free agency. So if you're the Padres, you want to get more pitching. If you're thinking, hey, we want an outfield bat, the Yankees certainly have a surplus of outfield talent. And if you're acquiring Juan Soto, it makes it a little bit easier to say, all right, here's Everson Pereira and or Spencer Jones, and you know you can kind of live with that a little bit more. But you know if they can get a Juan Soto, obviously that would probably pull you away from the Yamamoto sweepstakes, because if you're going to be acquiring Juan Soto, you imagine that comes with a hefty financial investment, and it would make it pretty tough to make. It's hard to like expect the team to make a $500 million and then a $300 million investment, basically. And I'm kind of rounding numbers a little bit there, but you know, like that's a pretty hefty thing to ask the Yankees to make. So you know, if they could get Juan Soto, obviously you could settle for like Jordan Montgomery, Eduardo Rodriguez, like just like somebody who's a good number 3 starter, upside to be a number 2, and then you add Frankie Montas there, and you know, again, referring kind of back to that Juan Soto situation, you know, you can trade one of your starters. You can say, hey, you know, here's like Chase Hampton, here's Randy Vasquez, and, you know, if you don't want Clark Schmidt, do you want maybe Nestor Cortez, right? Like something like that. You know what I'm saying? And again, like you can never have too much pitching, I feel like. So, you know, even if the Yankees walk into 2024 and it's like, hey, we have 6 guys who should be starters, but we only have 5 rotation spots. It's a good problem, man. Like we thought we were gonna have that same problem this year, where it's like, oh man, what do we do with Herman or Schmidt? And both of them ended up starting, and only one of them made it through the whole season, right? Like when we looked at that rotation, or the 6 guys you thought could compete in opening day, it was Garrett Cole, Carlos Rodon, you had Frankie Montas, you had Luis Severino, you had Nestor Cortez, and you had Herman and Schmidt as depth starters. So that's actually 7. How many of those guys can you, number one, could you have reliably trusted at that time to get through the season? And then how many of those guys ended up getting through the entire season? It's just Cole and Schmidt, right? Like that's, I think people need to understand just the volatility that comes with starting pitching. It's really hard to get a group of guys to get through an entire season, and having depth and being ready to lose guys and plug different guys in is super important. Obviously, you have guys like Johnny Brito, Randy Vasquez, you have Will Warren, Clayton Beater, as you mentioned. You know, those are all guys who can help. Maybe Drew Thorpe or Chase Hampton, or maybe even Richard Fitz can step up at some point during the year, although I think that's a little bit of a long shot to say like, hey, you know what, Chase Hampton, Drew Thorpe, you have like 50 innings of AA experience. We're going to rely on you at some point to make starts this year. That's more of like a hopeful situation. I think Fitz is a little more realistic because he's pitched his entire season last year in AA. But again, ultimately, we're talking about just trading out of his strength. If it comes down to, hey, Yamamoto or Juan Soto, you're obviously going Juan Soto. If it's Yamamoto or Montgomery and there is no Soto in this situation, you're the New York Yankees, right? Like you have every financial asset in the world. Go out and get the best guy on the market, and that's Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And I want to end it with this little question. How many times did 25-year-old superstar caliber talent become available on the pitching market, and all you have to do is give up money? That's it. Like that's you. No prospects, nothing else, just money. You're the New York Yankees. Let's be real here. You should always go for the top option.
Yeah, and look, you have money coming off the books in the future too. You know, you go out and get Yamamoto, and then you get Juan Soto. You can afford to pay both of them. Is it going to cost you $700 million? Maybe, but it's a long time and it's spread out. And look, eventually Giancarlo Stanton's deal in 2028 is gone. So you have some relief there, and ultimately that will go right over to Soto, theoretically. And there's, Rizzo is making $20 million a season. Take that money, roll it over. Like, look, the Yankees can take positional players, for example, Rizzo, after this season, you let him go. Take that $20 million, you apply it to Juan Soto's contract, which will probably average in the $40 million per season range or whatever, $35 million, I don't know, somewhere in that range. And, you can figure out where to get the money. First base, DJ LeMahieu, welcome. You're our everyday first baseman. Or how about this? Prospect, Ben Rice. This is your chance to shine. Eventually, DJ LeMahieu's contract will expire. He'll be off the books. You're saving some money there. This is a situation where the Yankees obviously have the money. It's just a matter of, can some of their prospects step into starting roles where they can keep the cost down? And the same thing, like if they're going to trade Gleyber Torres, you're saving a lot of money there. If he's going to make $15 million next season and then perceivably $20 million, maybe more per year after that, if he signs an extension, maybe you want to put a prospect there and then ultimately, smooth over that position at a much cheaper price point, and you just go with Juan Soto instead. Like there's ways to curate money here if you're the Yankees, if you're worried about getting over that last luxury tax threshold. But look, you add Juan Soto and Yamamoto to this team, you're instantly back in the fold for a World Series. Like those two players mixed with Garrett Cole, Aaron Judge, and a bunch of the other young, exciting talent that we have, you're right back in the mix, man. Like that's one of the ways you can get back into the World Series conversation, is going out and getting those superstar level players and having some of your prospects develop and become, important prospects and impactful players here, like Austin Wells, for example, good offensive catcher. Like there is a lot the Yankees can do to smooth over some expensive things and use prospects to their advantage here. If not trade some of them away. So, right now I'm feeling like I would have personally go with Yamamoto over Montgomery. If you're going to spend big and you're going to spend over $100 million on Montgomery, you might as well go out and spend $200 million on Yamamoto, who's 25 years old, 5 years younger, as you referenced, and he's a legitimate superstar caliber talent. Like, this is a prospect who is ready to become a star for the long term. And you have a rotation. If Rodon bounces back, Garrett Cole, Rodon, and Yamamoto, that's something to be scared of if you're an opposing team. Like that's really freaking good. That's really freaking good. And then you have Michael King, who looks fantastic. Clark Schmidt, who hopefully takes a step forward, given they don't trade him. And Nestor Cortez. Like, you have a really good rotation there. And then you have young prospects developing too. Now you utilize some of that surplus on hitting, as you mentioned. So I do agree with you in that sentiment. Like, Yamamoto seems like the move if I were the Yankees. But guys, love to hear your perspectives below on the YouTube comment section regarding the specific kind of decision, if you will. Obviously, would love to hear your thoughts about the idea of bringing back Montas anyway. They could probably bring back Montas and sign Yamamoto. Wouldn't be that big of a difference. Still $7.5 million. Like, it's basically nothing. You're basically rolling Isaiah Kiner-Falefa's contract into Montas at the end of the day. So, there's definitely a consideration there. Always happy to hear your thoughts. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Yankees episode.